The Promised Neverland began as an undeniably captivating work of fiction. The combination of its beautiful artwork, charming characters, tightly written storyline, and deeply unsettling premise had gravity. It pulled the reader into a world that seemed eager both to lean into the horror of the situations it created, but also find light and hope under the direst of circumstances. Both the first sections of the manga and the first season of the anime adaptation were as compelling as they were complex, as they were tense, as they were mysterious. And the story was about something. Its twists and turns were not there just to be shocking, though shocking they certainly were, but were essential to the themes of the work as a whole. The Promised Neverland had a message. It was making an important point. Or so we thought. Since the series concluded in 2020, the conversation has revolved less around what made it special in the first place, and more around the disappointment people felt in the direction it took and where it ultimately lands. The common consensus is that it got bad. And even I can't deny that its magic does fade. Its once sharp writing dulled. But zooming out and looking at the story from bright beginning to controversial end, there is so much more to it than it got bad. This story has depth all the way through, whether it meant to or not. The Promised Neverland is just as often messy as it is poignant, its subtext static as a snowflake, and yes, for better or likely for worse, its style does shift, but it is never not interesting. Strap in, because we are analyzing this remarkable manga top to bottom to discover its core purpose hidden beyond the inconsistency. And there is a hell of a lot to say. Welcome to Reconstructed. Our initial setting is Grace Fieldhouse, an idyllic orphanage in the countryside. The children who live here are happy and well provided for, looked after by a kind matriarch they all refer to as Mom. The three oldest kids in the house, all 11 years old, form our trio of main characters. Emma is energetic and starry-eyed, Ray is sarcastic and aloof, Norman is calm, intelligent, and kind-hearted. They behave as one large, content family, and it seems a near-perfect life for these kids as they await adoption. But there are signs that not all is right here, such as the numbers tattooed or perhaps branded onto their necks. Quick note, while I'll use clips from the anime, I am exclusively analyzing the manga in this video. Adaptational differences won't be considered much. So after establishing the characters and setting, we learn that one of the youngest kids, Connie, has found a foster family and will be leaving that night. Following a happy goodbye, Emma and Norman notice that she somehow has forgotten her beloved stuffed animal, Little Bunny. Together they decide to skirt the rules and deliver it to Connie before she leaves, even though they are never allowed near the gate to the outside world. What they find there is horrifying. Not only is their little sister dead in the back of a truck, she is about to be eaten by sickening, demonic, supernatural entities. And to make it worse, Mom is fully aware and is helping the demons. The orphanage, the only home they've ever known, is a meat farm. Shaken to their core, Norman and Emma resolve to defy their fate and escape from the slaughterhouse they now know Gracefield to be. Before long, they inform Ray and we are off to the races. This is our setup. Can these children overcome this gut-wrenching situation they were born into? Can they beat the overwhelming odds and break out while working with extremely limited information and a strict time limit, all while having to pretend like they've learned nothing at all? Three young orphans, all with genius-level intelligence, staging a sort of prison break against their supposed mother who was raising them to be food. It's compelling, and it's also not even close to that simple. The first feature of what makes the Grace Fieldhouse arc so powerful is its complexity. There are major ideological differences between the kids. It is incredibly important to Emma that the escape plan include all of their siblings. She doesn't want to leave anyone behind. Ray, on the other hand, finds that idea far too unrealistic and insists they need to take only their best chance at survival, which would be escaping just the three of them. Norman is harder to pin down, but for now he goes along with Emma, though their motivations and methods diverge significantly. Furthermore, one of the first things the reader learns about Mom, whose real name is Isabella, is that she too has a number on her neck and is fighting for her own survival as well. She was never just a minion of the demons, but a real person with her own set of goals and motivations. Finally, Isabella brings in an adult assistant, Sister Krone, who it turns out also acts independently and selfishly, willing to leverage any information she can get to serve her personal ambition and supplant Isabella for the mom position. So it's not actually kids versus mom like it seemed at first. The conflict is Emma versus Ray versus Norman versus Krone versus Isabella versus demons. No one is fully allied with anyone else. The children have to simultaneously deceive Isabella and each other, all three fighting for their personal vision of what their future should be. Krone has to investigate the situation to twist things to her benefit without revealing her duplicity to Isabella. Isabella herself has to prevent the children from escaping without damaging their value as merchandise, or otherwise alerting the demons that anything has gone wrong. It goes on. To some extent, even the reader is another entity in this equation. While we return to Emma most frequently, there is no point of view character. Everyone has an internal monologue we witness to establish their interiority and true feelings, but we never learn all of what anyone knows. Each character has their secrets from each other and from the reader. The author draws curtains to hide and reveal specific pieces of information with precision to make the story as engaging as possible. That we are kept largely in the dark until certain explosively revelatory moments mirrors the kids' struggle for any understanding of the alien world they find themselves in. Okay, but I need an aside about Sister Krone's appearance. Her depiction is strongly reminiscent of the horribly racist history of minstrel shows in America. Her design and behavior perpetuate harmful racial stereotypes about black women in particular, especially when you compare her to the grace and femininity of the other antagonist. To give the artist the benefit of the doubt, I don't think all this comes from bigotry, but rather ignorance of the history of this sort of caricature and the harm it causes. In the end, Krone is still a complex, intelligent character who enriches the story, but I just felt with how often I'm putting her on screen that I needed to criticize this aspect of the manga directly. They should have known better, they should have done better. Anyway, as an example of the sort of payoff this complexity in structure and hiding of information provides, let's take a close look at the first major twist of the arc. The kids' preparation is going smoothly, but they soon become wary of how Mom isn't making any moves, even though they know she's investigating who went to the gate that night. They decide that it's likely she has an informant. There may be a traitor among them. Well, it's foreshadowed to be either Gilda or Dawn, the two next oldest kids who were recently brought in on the secret and who will be important later. The traitor is found out to be Ray. Norman forced out this information with a subtle trap even the reader was not aware of. We find out not when Norman realizes, but the same moment he directly accuses his friend. So Ray has been feeding key information to Isabella the entire time, and not only that, knew about the secret for years and years without telling anyone. But this is not as devastating a blow as it first seems. Ray explains that he is still committed to the escape plan and is exploiting his unique relationship with Mom to give her a false sense of control over the situation, and that he intentionally goaded Norman and Emma into going after Connie that night at all. Norman and Ray then strike a deal where Ray does not reveal to Mom that he was discovered and gives her false information, in exchange for Norman agreeing to deceive Emma and move forward only with a plan that excludes the younger children. In one scene, our perspectives on several different characters change completely. Ray transforms from a boy with seemingly unsourced negativity to someone who worked in isolation for years, who grew up tortured by knowledge he could not share. Norman goes from calmly following Emma's lead to facing a moral dilemma where he must betray the trust of one of his two best friends. And poor Emma, whose optimistic vision is potentially being destroyed without her knowledge. Even our perception of Isabella fundamentally changes. She has been disobeying the demon's rules for years by not killing Ray as soon as he found out what was going on, indicating a deeper ideological conflict within her to be explored later. The Promised Neverland is strikingly cognizant of how every individual has their own distinct worldview, and how differing perspectives will necessarily conflict even among those who have so much in common. The spiderweb of character motivations that results fosters a story driven by wit and trickery rather than action. The reader waits with bated breath to see how these characters will outsmart each other, the secrets of their mind games revealed bit by bit, the curtains slowly drawn further open. And everything is on the line. The next core element of Grace Fieldhouse is the incredibly high stakes. From the opening moments, it is crystal clear that the danger here is very real and very close. After all, the first chapter includes the murder of a 6-year-old girl. There is no hope for these children to continue their lives except to pull off this escape. The penalty for failure could not be higher, and they have less than 2 months to succeed, forced to execute their plan before Rei's 12th birthday when he is guaranteed to be harvested. But the first casualty following Connie is someone the reader might have assumed to be safe. Sister Krone and the children form an uneasy alliance. Krone agrees to feed them any information they want, and in exchange, their successful escape will guarantee Isabella's downfall. Norman does suspect that she will betray them sooner than later, but before this plotline has the chance to advance, and at practically the moment Krone does find the incriminating evidence she was desperate for, Isabella informs her she has been called back to headquarters. When Krone then tries to whistleblow on Isabella, she is summarily dismissed and killed. Heart impaled by a blooming flower just like Connie. She lost because she neither knew nor could have known how high the conspiracy went, just how corrupt these systems are. In her final moments, she reflects on her lifetime of being forced to ruthlessly compete to survive, how this ground her empathy into dust, and how foolish it was to try to find a life worth living within the cruelty. She does a small part to atone by leaving the children her one precious clue about life outside the farm, largely to spite Isabella and the systems that crushed her and threw her away. Immediately after Krone's death, Isabella finally takes the offensive. In one fell swoop, she cuts off all personal communication with Rei, interrupts the kids' long-planned scouting mission to observe what lies beyond the wall that encircles the farm, breaks Emma's leg with her bare hands, and announces that Norman will be leaving, will be shipped out, the very next evening. The carefully constructed plan is in ruins. Emma and Rei beg Norman to escape on his own, to live on no matter what. And even though it is made heart-wrenchingly apparent to the reader that yes, Norman desperately wants to live to see a new life with the people he loves, he refuses, due to the belief that the only sure way to secure his siblings' safety is to sacrifice his own life. The next night, he is led away, packing nothing in his suitcase but the memory of his once happy childhood with Emma and Rei, to be slaughtered. No one in the Promised Neverland is safe. Ever. Even a main character, and a main character framed as the most intelligent of all of them, can be killed off. This is a brutal world. The pinpricks of light and optimism it presents are surrounded by vast, swallowing darkness. This turn of events is obviously devastating to Emma. She crumbles and risks everything in a futile effort to force Norman into escaping. Once he's gone, she appears to enter a catatonic state, her dream of escaping with everyone irreversibly shattered. Mom Isabella takes this opportunity to provide her version of comfort. She coos to Emma.
You poor thing, you're in pain. You can't do anything alone. Your wings are broken. Just give up. The best way to not suffer anymore is to give up.
We'll return to this scene, but I want to highlight another core aspect of what makes this arc so strong: the difficulty. The intricacy of the story and how high the stakes are raised would lose their edge surely if the long-sought escape turned out to be trivial, if Isabella was in the end easily defeated. But you already know that's not the case. At every turn, the children learn new information that only ever makes their task taller. This begins with the discovery of the tracking devices implanted in each of their ears. Isabella therefore always knows where they are, so any escape without removing or disabling them would be pointless. Solving this problem is crucial to their success, and Rei has been planning ahead since he was 6 years old. As part of his previously mentioned arrangement with Isabella, Rei has been slowly collecting gadgets from the outside world as periodic gifts for good behavior. Each one held a single part he used to construct a fragile machine capable of remotely disabling the trackers. Creating their lifeline took years of effort and entire childhood sacrificed to constant study. It was not easy. But even Rei, with all his insight, was fully convinced that their initial 2-month time limit was legitimate. Norman even pushed up the planned date by weeks in order to catch Isabella off guard. None of them thought it was possible that Norman could be sent off spontaneously as he was, and yet it happened at the worst possible time. Everything now has to be rearranged, and they lost an incredibly valuable friend. this is not easy. Perhaps the most soul-chilling twist is what lies beyond the wall at the edge of the garden. The maw of a massive ravine dozens of feet across and miles deep. Crossing it with a jump would be impossible. After everything they've accomplished so far, the gap between them and freedom only widens. This will not be easy. Every tiny victory on the path to their escape is hard fought. The pace of the manga thus far is deliberately slow so that the reader feels the struggle of the children, feels how frustrating and demoralizing each setback becomes. The hopelessness of fighting against a sickeningly powerful and evil system can be overwhelming. For Rei, it was too much, and his perspective was gradually poisoned by each tragedy. He had to spend years watching his older siblings be shipped out one by one, knowing their horrible fates. Nearly 2 months after Norman's death, at midnight on his 12th birthday, we learn that Rei has long given up on living. In the face of a sick world he believes to be unchangeable, he has only one way to renounce it, one way to reaffirm his humanity, denying his oppressors the pleasure of consuming him. He douses himself in gasoline and lights a match. Hopefully some of his family can escape in the aftermath of the fire, but they will certainly never have him. Isabella presents Emma with a new form of escape.
Just accept things as they are and resign yourself. You're suffering because you resist. Reckless idealism. A juvenile sense of justice. An impossible escape. Futile resistance to reality. Become a mom and give all of that up. Be relieved of the pain, Emma.
She has the opportunity to become a mother as well, to live on, and all she has to do is abandon everything she stands for. All she has to do is give up. The world cannot be changed. But Emma has always been defined by her relentless optimism, by her tenacity in the face of tragedy. Giving up is the one thing she can never do. She firmly rejects Isabella's offer, and weeks later she catches Rei's lit match with her bare hands before he ignites. She takes him by the collar and delivers a posthumous message from Norman.
You can die anywhere. It doesn't have to be here. I'll show you something cool, so just shut up and come.
The escape is still on. All the time Emma spent seeming defeated and unresponsive was a ploy to make Isabella feel she had already won. She was surreptitiously giving information to Dawn and Gilda on how to carry out Norman's master plan that he constructed on the day of his death. They use Rei's fire idea but substitute the boy himself for sausages, hair braids, and the tracker they remove from his ear. As Isabella fights desperately to extinguish the flames and salvage what she believes to be Rei's body, the rest of the children are already sprinting through the forest. They cross the ravine with a grappling hook of bedsheets, stones, and coat hangers, every step of the process meticulously practiced during their playtime while it seemed like nothing was going on. Rei is stunned, having planned to die on this day for years, yet finding himself alive and witnessing the execution of a plan he thoroughly believed impossible. For the first time, he allows himself to hope. Grace Fieldhouse burns to the ground and its captives are finally emancipated. After all the sacrifice and struggle, and no matter what unknown horrors await them beyond, this victory is raw and real. It was earned with blood and made possible by Emma's undying perseverance. Yet at the same time, it is hollow. They have to leave the kids younger than 5 behind with the promise to return for them later, and, of course, they lost Norman. The resolution to the Grace Fieldhouse arc is far from both Emma's sunny vision and Rei's dark nihilism. The victor of the web of mind games was Norman in the end, and he doesn't even get to see it. Whew. Yeah, the first arc was good. It was really, really good. Before we examine how the story continues from here, I want to establish the final element of the first arc's success, the mystery. So far, I have only really discussed the interpersonal drama of the series, as that is where the focus mostly is, but since the beginning there have been plenty of hints at a much broader world and that we have only seen its fingertips. There is concern among the kids that the human world they read about in books no longer exists, especially as the most recent publications in the library were from 2015, a whole 30 years before the series is set. However, they do find proof that at least at one point there were allies on the outside. A hidden message in Morse code is discovered on the bookplates of books once belonging to a figure named William Minerva, encouraging them to run. They are also given a special pen that Krone originally took from a human researcher in headquarters that, as it turns out, contains more secret messages and strange coordinates. The journey may be tough, but there is something beyond the walls. In the brief glimpses we get of the demons, it is clear that they are far more than simple-minded monsters. They speak and seem to have social stratification and cultural traditions. The eating of humans, specifically their brains, which is why the children were given such a thorough education, is established as having utmost religious importance to the demons. Norman, Emma, and Ray are intended to be sacrificed at a ceremony known as the Tafari, given up to this unpronounceable symbol is the name of some higher being revered among the demons. What could it possibly mean? What sort of world are we getting into, run by a complex society of demons with concepts that may be beyond human comprehension? And how did all this come to be? Well, we'll have to keep reading. So what is the Promised Neverland saying so far? To me, it is firmly about the horror of oppressive power structures, how difficult systemic change will be, and the values and pitfalls of idealism. Another story with the same premise could easily have turned out to be a solitary demon house in the woods and been just as engaging, but no, TPN takes every chance to remind the reader that this is how its world works. Children are eaten for food in this society that will viciously resist any change. This can be comfortably read as a criticism of how we, under modern power systems, are told that there is a happy, thriving life ahead of us, but in reality spend most of our time exploited by those in control. This manga just takes that crushing experience that so many people share to a metaphorical extreme. Each character then can be seen to represent different ideologies, different ways to respond to systemic injustice. Ray is the doomer type, buried by the belief that the systems are too strong to ever crack, and self-sacrificing protest is the only effective statement. Self-immolation has a long and heavy history in real life after all. Emma is the idealist, demanding victory without compromise, driven by empathy and optimism. Norman fits between them, never willing to give up the best outcome, but grounded by an understanding that, as he says, the world's not so easy that we can have it all. The resolution of the arc, then, is a triumphant argument for the value of idealism and perseverance. Ray was flat out wrong in his perception of what was possible. While Emma's lofty goals were unrealistic and ultimately unmet, they still managed to achieve far more by chasing that spark of idealistic perfection than if they had compromised themselves before even setting out. This panel of Emma and a young Isabella standing on the wall illustrates this message. In the final big twist of Grace Fieldhouse, it is revealed that Isabella is Ray's biological mother. Neither is supposed to know this, but Ray somehow remembers the melody Isabella sang to him while pregnant, who in turn learned it from her childhood best friend while they lived on the very same farm. As it turns out, Isabella too discovered the secret as a child, but lost all hope of escape upon seeing the cliff beyond the wall. The relation between her and Ray may seem a bit cheap at first, but it works to equate the two of them ideologically. Both were crushed by believing the world could not change. While Isabella steeled herself to become a mother and survive no matter what, carving her best possible life within the system despite the harm that brings her supposed children, Ray as a boy had no such option and tried to choose self-destruction. The key difference between them is that Ray wasn't alone. He had someone to save him, while Isabella did not. After the kids escape and Isabella recognizes her defeat, she returns to the remaining younger kids and sings them that precious melody for the first time. Proven wrong, she finally allows her humanity to return. The message is ambitious and only works because of the complexity of the characters' perspectives and the staggering danger and difficulty they overcome. Without all those elements, it would lose its weight, its argument less magnetic. This general reading of the first arc is, I think, pretty straightforward. But also, to some extent, we are talking about the meat industry. The manga does not shy away from using vocabulary such as livestock, harvest, and merchandise to refer to these human children. There is recurring imagery comparing them to pigs and sheep. It's upsetting to see people treated like meat. This role reversal asks the reader to consider their own perception of when humans force other animals into uncannily similar situations in the real world. But to be honest, there's not a ton of support for a broader meat industry metaphor in the first arc alone. The core message lacks specificity. It can be taken to represent anything the reader believes to be injustice, like how I don't think it's meaningless that Emma, a girl who is not traditionally feminine in appearance or action, is presented with a reality where dedicating herself to motherhood is the only way to live. Therefore, perceived allusions to the meat industry may have been accidental, except for what happens directly after the escape. Once the Gracefield kids are out in the wilderness, they have nothing to go on except a set of coordinates left for them by the mysterious William Minerva. Before too long, their lack of knowledge of this world puts them in jeopardy. They struggle against both the hostile wildlife and the pursuing demon hunters sent from the farm. The situation turns dire quickly when Ray gets separated from the rest of the group with the pursuers closing in. But out of the blue, the kids are saved by a pair of cloaked figures who bring them to a secret system of underground tunnels. Quickly they realize that these two are demons as well, and while this causes a moment of panic, it becomes clear they don't pose any threat. Their names are Sonju and Mujika, and they are vegan demons. Sonju explains,
religious reasons. We decided not to eat humans for our faith, but only humans. We'll eat anything other than human flesh. We are what you call heretics of this society. Them, the farm, their ideology, profit, authority, everything. All of it is none of our concern. We don't care.
So not quite vegan, I guess, kind of like pescatarians, but for all non-human animals. What's a good name for that? Humanitarian? No, that one's already taken. Huh. Anyway, our once straightforward understanding of what these demons are is quickly tangling. They are just as capable of massive ideological and cultural differences as humans. At the same time, they have a much greater capacity for diversity in physiology and intelligence. The kids just escape from a monstrous demon with far too many eyes and limbs, clearly incapable of speech and strategy when compared to the pursuers. In fact, the powerful lead hunter contemptuously refers to the creature as an inferior species. Yet all of them are still demons. Sonju goes on to shed light on the true nature of this world. In the past, demons and humans coexisted in a predator-prey relationship. The demons, with their vastly superior physical abilities, terrorized the human race worldwide. Being hunted down by intelligent enemies was a constant fear of past human societies, but 1,000 years ago the world was split in two, and the demons had to give up on hunting humans forever, only able to raise them in farms. This agreement is called the Promise, created and enforced by the divine figure known as. This lore again asks the reader to consider humanity's place in nature in our world. For all of recorded history, humans have successfully removed themselves from the food chain, or more accurately, cemented their place on top of it. It is exceedingly rare in modern times for people to find themselves in a situation where a wild animal is trying to eat them. The visceral horror of being something's prey is foreign to nearly every human alive today. Has then our collective safety created an arrogance in our species, an unearned sense of being separate from the natural world? If being hunted was as common an existential threat as, say, cancer, wouldn't that change everything about how society functions? And shouldn't that change how we understand and treat other animals? These are among the questions that the world building in the Promised Neverland raises. After this reveal, Emma asks Sonju to show her how to hunt, teach her to take another creature's life. After Emma shoots down a bird, he demonstrates the traditional demon ceremony called Gupna. The life of the prey is taken by impaling its heart with a flower, which then blooms with the blood it absorbs. According to Sonju, this act dedicates the kill to the gods and won't work without respect. This is the same flower that Emma witnessed sticking out of Connie's dead body. Does knowledge of this ceremony reduce the horror she experienced? No. of course it is very cold comfort to know that the death of her little sister held spiritual meaning to the murderer. Emma reflects on the contradiction of having to kill others to survive themselves, and the scene ends without her reaching any conclusion. What I see here is a willingness from the Promised Neverland to explore difficult ideas. The broader implications of its premise are taken seriously and given the time to breathe. It is obvious to any reader with typical human emotions that the farm the children escape from is an evil institution that should not exist. What might that tell us about our farms? If you're still unconvinced that there is a building subtextual criticism of the real-life meat industry and even an argument in favor of veganism, look at this page and tell me otherwise. This is a mass production farm. The Gracefield kids were the equivalent of grass-fed free-range beef, but in this world too exists the cruelty of factory farming. The world building of these chapters develops the overarching metaphor of the series to closely parallel real-world animal rights issues. Even forms of killing animals widely viewed as acceptable are called into question. Quote-unquote humane farms are still shown as undeniably cruel. A fair hunt with spiritual importance and deeply held respect for the life taken is depicted with moral ambiguity rather than approval. No cogent answer to all these questions is given to the reader yet, but the foundation for one has been laid. The two friendly demons escort the children safely to the coordinates they were chasing. As they see them off, Mujika admits she grew more attached to them than she expected. Sonju, on the other hand, smiles menacingly. Despite all the kindness and helpfulness he showed, it turns out he is still deeply committed to hunting humans. His faith doesn't allow him to eat anything that isn't natural, particularly farm-grown meat. Wild meat is a different story. He aided them not out of altruism, but because if they form a new community and produce new generations, then he can once again slaughter and devour them without sin. He doubles back and effortlessly kills the remaining hunters from Grace Fieldhouse. Sonju is an ancient being well over 1,000 years old who is staunchly committed to his God-given right to kill and eat human beings. He seemed an ally, but in the long run is an extraordinarily dangerous enemy. Nothing in the Promised Neverland is easy. Finally arriving at the coordinates, the kids discover a secret underground shelter, presumably prepared for any escapees by Minerva. It has everything they need, from a huge supply of non-perishable food to fresh clothes and bathing facilities to further clues on where to go from here. It also contains a grown man who wants them dead. This character, who refuses to reveal his name, has been surviving alone for years and years after escaping from a different top-class farm. He had a family too, but is now the only one left and would rather the kids leave immediately than risk changing his lifestyle. They manage to subdue the man at first by taking advantage of his mental instability and an intuition that he isn't as willing to kill as he claims, but he remains a major threat to their safety here. As we dive into the next major story arc, I want to return to the elements I identified as key to the success of the first arc. Since the escape, our characters have not spent much time in believable danger. It was not all too difficult to reach the coordinates, and the very existence of the shelter is a massive relief. So the stakes and difficulty have been lowered temporarily, but with the promise that they will return soon enough. The reveal of Sonju's true feelings and that they are literally a world away from true safety announce that there are colossal hurdles in front of them yet. The complexity is raised again by splitting the demons into groups that conflict with one another. Despite the lore dumps, the mystery of this world remains high. Mujika gives Emma a strange amulet as their parting ways and tells her to find the 7 walls, whatever that means. We also still don't understand the true nature of or why Sonju believes the kids have already made an enemy of it. There is plenty that indicates that there is a lot left to discover. So as we proceed, I want to examine how the Promised Neverland maintains those key features throughout this next arc, but also in the following section, how shaky that maintenance begins to feel. So we have a new set of coordinates to follow, leading to a place labeled Goldy Pond. The shelter is nice, but they still have no idea how to cross to the human world, and this location is all they have to go on. The kids negotiate with the man, or really coerce him with the self-destruct button they found, into escorting Ray and Emma there. True peril will return on this journey. A warning of poachers is scrawled onto one of the bedroom's walls. The man, despite his bravado, clearly experienced a horribly traumatic event resulting in the loss of all his friends, something which he won't explain and also holds himself responsible for. He recognizes Emma's idealism and asks her what she will do if her decisions result in tragedy. This will not be easy. As they depart, the reader learns through internal monologue that the man is still firmly an antagonist. He plans on letting at least one of them die on the way and will refuse to help them through any danger. However, he is surprised at Ray and Emma's resilience. They figured out how to survive in the jungle full of animalistic wild demons much quicker than he expected. Ray and Emma solved the Zelda-like puzzle of the demon's only true weak spot being an eye in the center of their forehead without getting seriously injured. But while the kids are improving quickly, it is still quite strenuous for them, and as they approach their destination they have become haggard, and yet their determination has not wavered. This inspires in the man not a change of heart, but for the first time a drop of doubt in his convictions, just enough to urge them to turn back immediately. But it's too late, and Emma is captured. She awakens in an artificial fairy tale sort of town that quickly reveals itself to be a secret hunting ground where, of course, Emma is among the prey. This is Goldy Pond. This is what was waiting for them, and the man knew all along. Naturally, Emma defaults to trying to save as many of the other children as possible, but 2 of the 3 she specifically helped are swiftly killed. It wasn't that she gave them bad advice or didn't think quickly enough, but rather the most intimidating demon in the group of poachers recognized what she was doing and acted specifically to hurt her as much as possible, to breed as much hate in her toward him as he could. This is Grand Duke Leuvis, and he is not only the final boss of the area, but represents a huge ideological roadblock to Emma's worldview. Emma makes it through the day's hunt, but is deeply upset she couldn't protect more people. Before long, though, she is brought in on a sort of secret society. Some of the children trapped here have managed to survive for years and have constructed an elaborate plan to not only break out, but kill all of their demon oppressors and destroy this hunting ground for good, led by Lucas, one of the man's friends whom he had presumed dead. Luckily, the special pen Emma has that was guiding them acts as a key to a door deep under the facility that had always been inaccessible. Together, Emma and Lucas discover a floating elevator and a voice recording with further instructions from William Minerva. This elevator was a path to the human world, but is now blocked, and Minerva's directions are decades old. But there is still hope. The hunting ground was not always here, was not the place Minerva was trying to guide them toward as they had feared. All of this gives Lucas the information and inspiration he needs to initiate the plan the very next day. Let's go. We've got another prison break on our hands. So, the demons still have the overwhelming advantage in physical power, but do have significant disadvantages in number and preparedness. They have only been hunting inexperienced children for ages and should be rusty in a real battle. Also, there are only 5 of them. These hunts are very illegal, and this small group are the only ones in on it. One by one, each demon is drawn into a meticulous trap, created from years of studying each individual's unique personality and tendencies. And each demon is also designed to advance the reader's understanding of their society at large. Luce is known to be petulant and cruel, always picking on the weakest children he can find. He is dispatched with relative ease, unable to even process the situation. Also, he is the youngest demon, born after the promise and ignorant to any real struggle. Nos and Noma are brother and sister and hunt as a pair. They are overconfident and curious about what the rebels are planning, not realizing until too late that they are legitimately in danger. After Noma is taken out by a sniper, Nos becomes unbelievably distraught at her death. This is the first time we witness any demon show real emotions, and these are quite intense emotions at that. This being we see as a monster is transparently experiencing a profound sense of grief and anguish that takes everyone aback. And then he eats her corpse. This disturbing choice gives him a huge burst of speed and power and seemingly the ability to communicate with his dead sister, begging him to avenge her. Nos is defeated as well, but not before leaving the kids with a severe set of injuries and the reader with goosebumps. Lord Bayon is the owner of the hunting grounds, an elegant and dignified aristocrat. His existence conveys that demons too have concepts like private property and class hierarchy. Bayon remains calm during the rebellion, but the kids ultimately defeat him by luring him into narrow underground tunnels where he has the physical disadvantage. Only Grand Duke Leuvis now remains, and he is thrilled by the situation unfolding. Leuvis strongly resents the current social order where legitimate hunts are outlawed. Prior to the promise, he lived to fight, constantly risking his own life to battle against entire armies of humans. The risk-free, safari-style hunts at Goldy Pond are unsatisfying to him, and he is almost gleeful to find in the rebels, and Emma in particular, a worthy foe. Consequently, he allows the kids a massive head start, sitting motionless in the center square while his comrades are killed, leveling the playing field as much as possible to give himself a real challenge. Emma asks him directly if there is any way out of the situation without violence, and his answer is clear.
No. I want to hunt and kill you. And I would die happy if I was hunted and killed by you and your friends. You have beautiful ideals, but the world isn't made of just ideals. One's sense of values, or what's beautiful or ugly, varies. Among us, too. Don't think that we can understand each other. Our only option is to be in conflict.
Again here, Emma's high-mindedness is repudiated. Sometimes violence is necessary. The world is not so easy that we can have it all. By the time the final fight with Leuvis begins, the original battle plan is in shambles. Far too many of the kids have already been wounded, so some improvisation will be required. But they do have a real believable chance, likely only because of Leuvis's psychotic obsession with a fair fight. Also, the man, with all his strength and combat experience, has joined the battle as well. He has managed to overcome the trauma of losing his entire family in this exact location to try to rescue Emma and correct his mistake. Together, the rebels throw everything they have at Leuvis, and despite nearly killing him with a clever combination of breaking his mask, electrocution, and blinding him with flash grenades, nothing is quite enough. Thanks to the demon's incredible ability to regenerate any injury within minutes, Leuvis begins mounting a comeback, and the man starts to panic. He sees an all-too-familiar massacre unfolding in front of him and urges everyone to flee, insisting nothing more can be done. But with a combination of Emma's stubborn insistence that no one can be left behind and Ray's quick-thinking analysis, he barely agrees to stay for one last stand. In this ultimate all-out confrontation, the rebels use the entire remainder of their ammunition at once. Emma was stabbed through by Leuvis's claws, but manages to use the last of her strength to disguise another flash bomb within the barrage of bullets, catching the Demon Duke off guard for just the split second necessary for the man to line up one clean snipe, which he executes with steady hands. The rebellion was a success. Emma does fall into a coma and needs immediate medical treatment, but Goldy Pond has been defeated, and the man has achieved both a closure and a revenge he never dreamed was possible, reunited with his long-lost best friend and finally willing to embrace a newfound family. His name is Yugo. The Goldy Pond arc keeps the promises made about what this story will be, at least to my eye. The difficulty and stakes are once again sky high. What began as a potentially quick trip to a landmark as innocent sounding as Goldy Pond turned into all of what I just described. While it didn't match the intricacy of conflicting character motivations of Grace Fieldhouse, there is still plenty of complexity at play. Despite both being escaped humans, Yugo and Emma are at odds for nearly the entire arc, right down to the final seconds, and both end up learning a lot about their own perceptions from each other. The demons present an incredibly diverse set of villains, all with their own ideals and flaws, which prevent them from working as a group throughout the battle. Leuvis practically lets his comrades die. The mystery of the world is maintained, as for every question answered, another is raised. How and why was the elevator to the human world blocked? What in the hell was going on with Nos devouring Noma like that? Where can they possibly go from here? Lastly, I think Goldy Pond develops the themes of the story further, and in a natural and thoughtful way. We have another role reversal here, with the demons now in the position of people who hunt for sport. It is specified that this hunting ground is for recreation. These demons are trophy hunters. They're enamored with the idea of hunting, but only when the power dynamic is so disproportionately in their favor. How the demons have been depicted as a group at this point in the series is striking. They are an entirely different species from humans, at least as intelligent if not more so, enormously superior in physical ability, and while not immortal, can live for millennia. They also seem capable of intense emotions and experiences entirely beyond human comprehension. Lastly, they are us. The systems they create, the specific ways they abuse and brutalize human beings should be uncomfortably familiar to any reader. Each arc presents a new concept that can be easily taken as analogous to a real way that people treat animals. Those descriptors I listed about demons may not be dissimilar to how a human is perceived through the eyes of a pig. What then should we make of the Promised Neverland's utter lack of sympathy for its villains? Despite all the time spent establishing their distinct personalities, emotional range, and interiority, they are still portrayed as monsters. Or, because of their choices, they have made themselves monsters. Destroying them is the only option, and destroying them is entirely justified. What then? So, okay, when I first read the series, I had to take a break right at the end of Goldy Pond. I'd been reading physical copies of the volumes I borrowed from a friend, and they only went this far. In the few weeks before I decided to go ahead and catch up the rest of the way online, I thought a lot about the future of the series. I thought I had a good idea of where it was headed, but that it would take a long time to get there. So far the manga had been paced pretty slowly and in a way that seemed necessary, so to get everywhere was going to be a long journey. And so far the series hadn't let me down, though I guess I missed some warning signs in Goldy Pond for sure. I was just under 100 chapters in, and I figured to wrap everything up neatly it would need 400 or 500 chapters. As it turns out, it was already more than halfway over. So let's establish how fast time has been passing so far. The kids escape from Grace Fieldhouse in chapter 36, and Emma recovers from her Goldy Pond injuries and sets the next arc in motion in chapter 96. Only about 5 weeks passed between these two chapters. Things are going slow, which makes sense as they have a 2-year time limit before the siblings they left behind are old enough to be harvested. Between chapters 96 and 102, a year and 7 months pass. It is beyond jarring, and the Promised Neverland is never the same again. Fair warning, this section will be a bit lighter on analysis and heavier on complaining. The rest of the story has some interesting stuff worth talking about, but it is not at all executed in the same way. I need time to mourn what the manga used to be. First, some red flags from the previous arc. The Goldy Pond Rebellion had no casualties on the side of the humans. I typically dislike character death for the sake of character death, but this feels substantially unrealistic, especially with how grisly some of their injuries were. The Promised Neverland used to be good at convincing us that everyone was potentially in danger, but now tragedies not in flashback are very rare. Also, we get the confirmation that Norman is actually alive. He didn't get killed that day, he was just taken to some secret laboratory and made to take IQ tests and solve Rubik's Cubes. It's nice that Norman gets to live on, but now the only established character to have ever died after the first chapter is Sister Krone. Were the stakes ever even high to begin with? Next, the complexity has definitely been reduced. The conflict between Emma and Yugo was excellent, and Yugo's character development of learning to overcome his trauma and make the best of the life he still has is genuinely touching. But compared to the 6-way mind game battle with its myriad secrets from Grace Fieldhouse, this was all pretty straightforward. Ray, for example, was conspicuously not a real player in Goldy Pond, mostly just tagging along. This wasn't too much of a problem, but when Emma announces her weird and ambitious new plan following her recovery, Ray has nothing to say against it, not even any questions to ask. Now, I don't want to reverse his growth, but for him to suddenly just agree with everything Emma says and does without protest takes away so much of what made his character interesting in the first place. In fact, nobody has any problems with the new plan, even the Goldy Pond survivors who barely know her. She asks them to wait at least 2 more years to escape to the human world, even though it's actually feasible at the moment for a small group to make it, and all of them accept that without hesitation. If it were the first arc, the kids would likely have split into 5 different factions with their own perspectives and priorities, but no, now we have the one plan. The difficulty level and mystery remain unscathed following Goldy Pond, I'd say, but just you wait. So, the core of Emma's plan is to make a brand new promise with escaping without this may count as a breach of the current agreement and thus instigate all-out war between demons and humans. But they still do not understand what is, what creating a new promise would entail, or if it's possible at all. The first step, though, is finding the 7 walls, and they have some cryptic clues on where they might be. Finding them ends up taking that year and 7 months. It was probably extremely difficult, but we are told that rather than shown. We skip right ahead to the solution. Up until now, the reader was with the characters through all of their experiences in this alien world. We know about as much of what's going on as they do, if anything slightly more. Suddenly, the reader only understands a fraction of what the Gracefield kids do. They apparently spent months on end infiltrating demon society and studying their traditions and esoteric religious practices. The reader is still in the dark though, so when they present their solution to accessing the 7 walls, it sounds like nonsense. It's entirely the same feeling as using a walkthrough for every puzzle in a video game. This was supposed to feel meaningful, but instead feels random. The sense of difficulty is fading. But conflict does follow them closely. They do not get even a moment of celebration before the shelter is attacked by a group of assassins from the human world led by a man named Andrew. There is genuine tension as they try to escape this ambush, and some kids do lose their lives, but only unnamed ones the reader has never met before. In the end, Hugo and Lucas stay behind to ensure everyone else gets to safety, ultimately sacrificing themselves in the process. This does make the stakes feel high again and is emotionally very challenging for our main characters, but what feels unearned is how it's painted as a resolution to Emma and Hugo's ideological conflict. The question his character always represented to her is, what will you do if your idealism ends up hurting your own family? That's the situation that crumpled Hugo's spirit when he was a teenager. How will Emma deal with a similar predicament? Well, she never has to. With how she mourns Hugo and the dream sequence that follows, it's clear that the Promised Neverland needs the reader to believe that this is that situation for her, even though it just obviously is not comparable. Hugo stayed behind entirely of his own volition, and the shelter being attacked had nothing to do with Emma's decision-making. No one would think it's her fault. If this is what Emma's idealism being challenged looks like, then it's hard to believe it ever really will be. Also, Andrew, the main villain of this little arc, is by far the most one-dimensional we've had. He is simply a sadist following orders to exterminate these kids. Though I will give credit that his death scene is excellent. After so much time screaming at the kids that they have no rights and are simply food, he himself is devoured by a wild demon. Andrew thought his status granted him immunity, but the demon sure didn't care. Poetic, sorta. However, after this brief stressful period, the story wastes no time lowering the stakes and difficulty to the floor. They received a last-minute message from someone claiming to be William Minerva inviting them to a secret base. They arrive to find much more than a base. A thriving utopian treehouse city with everything the children could ever need has been waiting for them the whole time. From this page on, our characters are safe. There is plenty of story remaining, plenty of things left for it to say, but many of the qualities that once made the Promised Neverland so captivating have vanished. But regardless of all that, we do still have to talk about Norman. The Treehouse Utopia was, as it turns out, not created by William Minerva, who has long been dead, but Norman. 6 months prior, he and a few allies escaped from and destroyed the experimental research farm they had been imprisoned in. Since then, he has worked feverishly to build this incredible refuge for children from farms all across the demon world, all while building a master plan to ensure everyone's safety for good, starting with demolishing each and every farm one by one. Of course, there is a tearful reunion between Norman, Emma, and Ray. While the reader had known of his survival since before the time skip, and even his supposed death scene hinted in that direction, none of the other characters had even the slightest idea. It is, to them, a miracle. The catharsis of seeing these characters have a pure and happy moment after all the suffering they have endured is almost overwhelming. Even if you miss the high degree of danger that used to pervade the story, it is impossible not to smile at these children finally experiencing joy uncompromised. But this is not quite the same Norman we left behind at Grace Fieldhouse. The once timid, soft-spoken, and scrawny boy has changed dramatically. Even though he is 13 at the oldest, he is well over 6 feet tall and has become the unquestioned and revered ruler of this brand new city. His subjects treat him as a quasi-divine figure, and he apparently never allows them to see any weakness or even to see him smile. Even his inner circle talks about him with such intense admiration that he begins to feel like a cult leader. The same old Norman is in there still, but is buried under many layers of persona he forced himself to adopt. All of this is in service of advancing his plan, and said plan is a hard pill to swallow. During this section, we also lose the last key feature of the Promised Neverland that I identified back in part 1. The mystery of the world is now solved. Following the time skip, no new questions are raised, just old ones answered, and now we conclusively learn the true nature of the demons. It turns out they function much like the chimera ants from Hunter x Hunter. The whole species involuntarily incorporates the DNA of whatever they consume into their own, thus able to take on the features of any other animal. This tracks with the variable level of anthropomorphism we've observed throughout the story. Some demons are more human-like because they're the ones with access to human meat, while the quote-unquote wild demons have only been eating insects and lesser mammals. It explains, sort of, why Nos was able to communicate with Noma by eating her body. Their true nature was foreshadowed pretty cleverly, but its confirmation also makes them a lot less interesting than they used to be. Primarily, it tells us that they are really just more people. What was so compelling to me about them as villains were the ways in which they felt alien or supernatural. They seemed beyond human. But following the time skip, so much of that is reduced or even retconned. Take this comparison between the first time we see a room full of demons back in Chapter 7 with how the royal court is drawn in Chapter 150. There is so much less physical variety and more anthropomorphism. The demons have been flattened. Furthermore, prior to the time skip, we had no idea what a typical demon settlement even looked like. It turns out their cities are practically indistinguishable from a real human city that could exist on our Earth, and the demons themselves could mostly just be people wearing masks. Again, that is not how even the demon civilians used to be depicted. Now they are just another kind of person that happens to be dependent on cannibalism. Lastly, their once menacing physical superiority is simply no longer a factor, as some of Norman's subordinates have superhuman abilities and can easily take them down in direct combat, no need for any clever plan. These do not feel like the same demons. What disappoints me in the solution to what the demons are, something that didn't even need to be solved in my view, is how it functionally dismisses the questions about animal rights that the series used to willingly raise. Now we have a loud and clear message that humanity is very special actually. Being human is a uniquely important and even sacred existence that should be protected at all costs. In demon society, maintaining a human form is the top priority, and taking on wild features is viewed as a horrible disgrace, a punishment for the worst of criminals. The Promised Neverland ultimately believes that being human does put you above other forms of life. The horror of the series that for a while could be interpreted as a metaphor about how we treat other animals is, in the end, about how different groups of people treat each other. That is far from a bad theme to explore, but it does make the subtext of the story so much more common than it had the potential to be. So the manga more or less gave up on being about animal rights. It is not the vegan propaganda it played around with being. Oh well. That does not mean the second half of the story lacks ambition. Rather, how the Promised Neverland concludes is incredibly bold and acutely political. It doubles down on being about something, on conveying specific and potentially controversial observations toward our real world. Keep in mind how the manga has decided to equate demons with human beings as we examine what Norman's master plan turns out to be. During the first arc, Norman and Emma were mostly on the same page with their goals for the escape. They were differentiated by how they arrived at that conclusion. Emma is driven by emotion and empathy before anything else and has to learn how to think analytically. On the other hand, critical thinking and long-term planning come easily to Norman, while emotional intelligence does not. He pursued the plan of escaping with everyone because he wanted Emma in particular to be happy due to his affection for her. And while he strives to be as naturally empathetic as she is, he does not actually experience the emotions driving Emma as deeply as she does. This tendency towards cold analysis is what causes him to sacrifice himself. He determines that this choice will lead to the best possible outcome and so ignores the value of his own human life. To Emma, the inherent value of life is everything. To Norman, it is always secondary to accomplishing the goal. So, Norman's final plan for ensuring the safety of his family is to drive the demons to extinction. By destroying the active farms and dismantling the current government, they can deprive the entire population of access to human meat. Therefore, they will all slowly degenerate into far less intelligent wild animals which can easily be culled. As his swaths of followers cheer, Emma is horrified. This is an untenable solution to her. Yes, it will secure peace with a permanence that is otherwise impossible. Yes, it is by the statistics the most sure way for their family to find freedom, but it is against the very core of her being. She has lived among the demons, knows personally how similar they are to people, how capable they are of love and family and faith. Our final ideological conflict is between Emma and Norman, between the two best friends who began the series most closely allied. A once complex story is now just 1 versus 1, which may be regrettable, but it is at least a meaningful framework to finish with. Throughout the earlier parts of the series, while her successes have been getting easier and easier, Emma is never made to be entirely right. Her most outlandish ideas, such as escaping with even the tiny babies or ending Goldy Pond without violence, are proven impossible. The lesson she seems to learn is that it is best to search for victory without compromise, but necessary to accept when compromise is the only option. In this way, the Promised Neverland seems to agree with Norman's ideology. If there was a winner of the Grace Fieldhouse arc, it was him. Idealism can be great, but you must stay grounded. In their years of separation, Norman and Emma's respective experiences only widened the gulf between their ideologies. With every new form of injustice she witnesses, Emma's empathy forces her goals broader. She is now a bona fide revolutionary, unable to be content without changing everything about how the world functions. Norman, on the other hand, is even more narrowly focused on that same original goal of getting his specific family to safety. He only experienced the very darkest side of demon society in the experimental farm, and only met others who were similarly abused and for whom vengeance has become an obsession. So once again, he denies himself humanity to become the calculating, unfeeling leader his movement requires. By allowing every possible mean to justify the end, Norman is suddenly on the verge of committing genocide. And by the way, I am not the one applying that word. The official translation uses it for Norman's plan as well. The manga here has forced itself into a situation where, regardless of who wins plot-wise, it must now agree with Emma's ideology. To continue to support Norman's perspective, which has so far always been rewarded, would now send a morally unjustifiable message. How then does the Promised Neverland argue that it was Emma who was right all along? Spirituality is its answer. The spiritual elements of the series never took up much page space, but have always been faintly present. Sonju and Mujika do not eat humans for explicitly religious reasons rather than any secular argument. Elaborate temples are at the core of demon cities. The entire world of the series is not like this by accident, but by creation of a higher being known as... Emma and Rei sought the Seven Walls to form a new promise with, which they pursued because it was the only path to true victory without compromise. Norman was aware of this route, but its uncertainty made it all too unreliable in his eyes. Through unwavering dedication to her ideals, Emma proves that a brand new world is possible. She and Rei pass through the Seven Walls, survive the surreal four-dimensional world that lies beyond them where they nearly lose their minds, and against all odds succeed in forging a new promise with... This shows that while Norman's critical analysis will result in a higher likelihood of short-term success, Emma's strict adherence to idealism will in the long run have immeasurably greater potential to change what seems unchangeable. According to the Promised Neverland, there is an extremely powerful spiritual element to the universe, and the purer your ideals, the stronger your moral code, the more it will be on your side. It declares that because Emma deserves to be right, she is. If the world is not so easy that you can have it all, simply make it easier. But the story is still far from done. Certain conditions must be met for the new promise to come into effect, and Norman's plan is already in motion. And hey, doesn't the demon's obligate reliance on cannibalism undermine some of the themes? And what about Sonju and Mujika? Weren't they able to keep their human forms for centuries without eating people? If we're not talking about animal rights after all, then what are we talking about? Oh, and in order to seal the promise, Emma does have to agree to a major sacrifice, the details of which are kept in the dark. One more mystery to ride things out. These questions and more will be answered as we look at how the end of this strange, messy, uniquely flawed yet wonderful story goes down. I began my analysis by claiming the Promised Neverland works as a metaphor for oppressive power structures and what should be done about them. The farm at Grace Fieldhouse is, beyond any doubt, a system that abuses and exploits the powerless people under its control. Because of my personal beliefs and some memorable imagery that led me on a bit, I wanted the series to be about the system of the meat industry in particular, but support for that reading dried up as the story progressed. But make no mistake, the Promised Neverland does have some specific systems it views as the problem, and suggests some specific actions be taken against them. So the old promise seemed like a pretty bad deal for the demons, right? Sure, they had some casualties in the wars against the humans, but why would they give up hunting for nothing in return? Especially when the hunts are so deeply important to them. And yes, for the majority of demons, the promise was an awful decision that lowered the quality of their lives. But not the aristocracy. The political higher-ups of demon society agreed to the promise not because it was best for their people, but because they recognized an opportunity to entrench their power. If humans could only be raised in farms, then the owners of those farms could monopolize access to food. With exclusive ownership of the means of production of the most important good in society, the ruling class can dominate the working class. It's capitalism. And how it's depicted here is a step and a half away from explicitly Marxist. Adding to this is the answer to why Sonju and Mujika were so special, and why they were always on the run. Mujika was born with the unique ability to maintain her humanity without consuming humans, and to pass on that ability to anyone who drank her blood. This, of course, had the power to revolutionize demon society for the better, but to the royals it was nothing more than a threat to their power structures. The aristocrats, who again own all the farms, spread propaganda that Mujika was poisoning people, labeling her the evil-blooded girl. Ultimately, they purged everyone who had received this miraculous new ability, with Mujika herself the only survivor after Sonju abdicated his position as a prince to save her, both of them then forced into isolation for centuries. And in those centuries, demon society has only become more unequal. As demon towns crumble and degenerate because of the failing accessibility of sufficient food, the lives of the royals, who by the way include all the poachers at Goldy Pond, have only grown more decadent. Despite how impregnable they seemed at first, this is the true state of the demon government our characters are trying to topple, one with extreme class hierarchy and a desperate citizenry. It was already rotting from the inside. At first, it seemed impossible that Norman could really have the airtight plan to annihilate the demons without a single human casualty that he claimed. But it becomes clear that all he has to do is walk up calmly and place another straw on their back. So he does. Norman's battle plan was to pit the demons against each other, manipulating an exiled former aristocrat named Ghilan to be that very straw. Ghilan was banished hundreds of years ago for too stridently challenging the authority of the queen and expressing too much compassion for the lower classes. He serves as a miniature lesson in how trying to change corrupt systems from within is often futile. But as a warrior, he is anything but useless, enacting his revenge by killing all of the sitting members of the upper aristocracy, leaving only the queen, to whom he eventually falls. This is Queen Lagravalima, Already weakened by combat but still standing tall, she is the final boss of the Promised Neverland. The Queen is the ultimate culmination of the evils of the system. She ascended to the throne via an obscene display of self-serving betrayal, including the murder of her own father, and everything she does is to feed either her endless avarice or her endless gluttony, and maybe those two deadly sins have been the same all along. To La Gravalima, everything and everyone in the world exists solely for her to devour, and she will never be satisfied until exactly that occurs. While Norman's strongest fighters and a surprise appearance from Sonju bring her to her knees, it is the Queen's own greed that ultimately kills her. She attempts to summon the combined strength of the uncountable multitudes of humans and demons she has consumed, but this act overwhelms her struggling body and every one of her cells bursts open, leaving her a lifeless husk of flesh. Pleasant stuff, huh? Only now does Emma arrive on the scene to convince Norman to call off his plan. Clearly, she was a bit too late for the royals, but she does get him to cancel the remainder of the genocide by, in small part, informing him she succeeded in making a new promise, and in large part by begging him to accept his own humanity, to for once decide by embracing his own emotions rather than burying them. Norman, her oldest friend, was the final and most difficult person to convince of her idealism, of her belief that the inherent value of human life must be held above everything else. All she needed to accomplish this was the power of God on her side and virtually everything to go her way for like 120 straight chapters. But whatever, I still think it's a nice moment, regardless of how much easier it was than we all expected it to be. However, even with all the focus on compassion over everything, the massacre of the aristocracy is framed as a necessary evil. Norman specifically says he has no regret for that aspect of his plan, and even Emma does not mourn them. The system needed to be destroyed, even if it meant violence, and I do not consider it a stretch to say that the depiction of the Demon Royals is a pointed critique of modern capitalism. Their methods of control are too specific and too recognizable, their leader too on the nose, a manifestation of all-consuming greed. And the demons that were the system needed to be destroyed. The Promised Neverland says, with little ambiguity, eat the rich. The climax of the story has now passed. The reader is left with a moral message to never give up on your ideals no matter how hard things get, and that human life is inherently valuable, and a political message that capitalism is oppressive and unnatural and needs to be replaced. While I still dislike the abandonment of complexity and difficulty following the time skip, the story still ends up more or less where it was always headed. It would have punched harder if it had given all these themes more time to be interrogated, put its characters through more difficult situations to really test their beliefs, but there is strength here still. But okay, if you're suggesting we end our modern economic system with violence if necessary, you should probably provide a replacement. We do still have about 20 chapters left, and The Promised Neverland uses them to stumble through the strangest, most incoherent suggestion for a new world. This is where the story finally well and truly lost me. If the pre-time skip chapters were a beautiful mansion, and the post-time skip chapters were the promising but incomplete framework of another, the falling action is a shabby two-person tent that just blew away in the wind. Forgive me if my recap of what is left feels too brief or curt, but I am very tired, both as I was reading it then, and as I am writing this right now. The story forks a bit here. We have the demons dealing with the aftermath of everything that just happened, and the kids, finally, spoiler alert, crossing into the human world. These two arms of the remaining story are presented side by side, but here we'll take them one by one. Let's start with the demons. Our protagonists are now Mujika and Sonju. The entire ruling class of the society is now dead, so their task is to scramble and set up a new system of governance before chaos takes over. The key element to the plan is distributing Mujika's special power to everyone, no questions asked, permanently freeing demons from their dependence on consuming humans. This will form an inherently more equitable society. Another unjust hierarchy based on access to food will never be possible again. Sure, sounds great. And in the final nail in the coffin to the difficulty aspect of the story, Sonju just acquiesces to this plan. Initially foreshadowed as an incredibly powerful and dangerous enemy, when confronted with a new society where he'll never be able to eat people again, he shrugs and says, oh well. Disappointing, in my opinion. However, there is some struggle to catch the ear of the citizens, and they are nearly executed by demons loyal to old power. But Of all things, they are saved by Grand Duke Leuvis, who demonstrates the safety of Mujika's blood and gives them authority to establish a new government. This is the same Leuvis whose most distinctive trait was his intense and terrifying fixation on the joy of hunting humans. Also, how did he survive his apparent death in Goldy Pond? Doesn't matter, he's just good now. Whatever. The scene ends with Mujika now being crowned the new queen, and the crowd cheering wildly. A new queen. So after the dramatic destruction of the old power structures, with the opportunity to institute any utopian new political system one could think of, they choose to just make another monarchy. Really, according to the Promised Neverland, the problem was not with the hierarchy itself, not with the shape of the system, but just with who was on top. The problem was not with one person having total control, it was with the wrong person having total control. The best this story can possibly imagine for the demons is living under a benevolent dictator. In the end, within the true ideology of the series, it does not matter if the new system resembles the old one as long as it solves the core problem, an ignorance of spirituality. A key part of Sonju and Mujika's plan is reviving these ancient high priests from mummification or something and letting them lead the way. According to these priests, demon society had become so cruel and unequal over the years because of how they betrayed the core tenets of the demon's religion with the old promise. That the aristocracy was already rotting away and thus relatively easy to topple was not chance, but rather an inevitability. In fact, they believe Mujika's magic blood to be a gift directly from the gods themselves. Their faith already, long ago, laid out the morally correct way to live. Any system that ignores it will eventually crumble, and any system that embraces it will naturally prevail. The rest is minor details. Okay, so back to the kids. All they need to do is gather everyone and leave to the human world, the entrance fittingly hidden within the Gracefield farm itself. There is some unconvincing drama when the younger children are kidnapped, but they are simply taken to Gracefield where they were headed regardless. The very last villain that is trying to block them from escaping and creating a new world is Peter Rattray, a human whose clan has been tasked with maintaining the promise since its inception. If the demon royals were capitalists, Rattray is perhaps a fascist or something. He tries to kill people with gas showers, so make of that what you will, but I don't want to spend any time on that interpretation because Emma, for some reason, tries her very best to redeem him. Don't worry though, he dies miserably. At least we get that. This section also features the return of Isabella, who is kept alive due to her usefulness as a breeder, but ultimately betrays Rattray and helps the kids escape. This does make things easy once again, but it feels earned to me considering how Isabella was developed over the first arc. She dies though in the most random way. Maybe she needed to atone for all the harm she caused by participating in the system for so long, but that is not a punishment the manga has doled out consistently. Now, finally, all of the children are gracefully transported to the human world, where they are easily accepted into society. The sacrifice that Emma made with the new promise, which had been held secret as the only potential thing keeping the stakes high, turns out to be her being separated from her family and losing her memories of them. But she still lands on Earth, and eventually they simply find her and are reunited anyway. That's our story. That is what happens in the Promised Neverland, cover to cover. Okay, but let's rewind just a bit. When the Gracefield kids minus Emma land in the human world, the first thing they see is the Statue of Liberty. They are apparently in the former United States of America. Ah, that's interesting. Former. Between 2020 and 2045, the human world experienced a slew of climate disasters that brought on a world war. In the wreckage, a borderless egalitarian society was built, which is the world our characters stumble into. This is a pretty bold political suggestion to include in your unquestionably happy ending. Abolition of borders is far from a mainstream belief, but here it is presented as the solution for a collapsing society. But how does this mesh with the demons carrying on with a strict monarchy? Why the specific criticism of borders when a major part of Emma's promise was the barrier between the two worlds be sealed forever while the demons are portrayed to be just another kind of person? Is that not just a new border? The ending to The Promised Neverland is politically pretty incoherent, but there is a consistent core that forms the true message of the series. Respect for the inherent value of human life is essential. Any world that lacks that respect is diseased and will ultimately crumble and fall. It is unafraid of diagnosing our modern society as a failure in that regard, but does not know, nor pretend to know, all the answers to what it should be instead. All it promises is that if you stick to that ideal through thick and thin, weather the strongest storms, eventually, the right way to live will triumph. Cross your fingers and pray that you're in the generation that is alive when it does. With all that said, the original question of the analysis remains. Why did the Promised Neverland change so much throughout its story? Why did it not maintain the features that made its beginning so distinctive and powerful? Simply put, it couldn't. The Promised Neverland began as an undeniably captivating piece of fiction. It ended as something stylistically unrecognizable from what drew people in the first place. There is a vague narrative surrounding the manga that it was rushed, that circumstances outside of the author's control forced the second half of the series to be like that. But in my research, I couldn't find much in the way of direct support for that claim. The writer, Kaiu Shirai, is a very private person and virtually nothing is known about his life or personal beliefs. He even uses a pseudonym, and his legal name and age are not public knowledge. There is one interview, though, that I believe sheds at least some light on his mindset toward his own writing. When asked if there were any historical or political events that influenced the manga, he says,
"None in particular."
When asked what he wanted to communicate with the story, he says,
"I don't have a specific message I want to tell people. I didn't want to push my ideas onto the reader either. How something is perceived isn't up to the author. I hope that each reader feels something from my work."
So the Promised Neverland was never supposed to have all the answers, never intended to prescribe an ideology with any degree of specificity. The messy, contradictory, and almost unbearably saccharine ending was then kind of inevitable. The conclusion is blindingly optimistic because, before anything else, the author wanted it to be like that. If your purpose is not to prove a point or to be as realistic as possible, then why not finish off with a warm and comfy victory? However, this story is just not the work of an incurious person. It's impossible for me to believe that Kaiu Shirai doesn't have any coherent opinions or political beliefs of his own. There are strongly subversive ideas present throughout the text, and I would list my evidence, but that is essentially what I just spent over an hour doing. I have read plenty of stories that simply accept the status quo, and The Promised Neverland is not among them. But I could never claim to know exactly what the author believes, and clearly he doesn't want people to. I also have to acknowledge the influence of the other creative lead on the series, Posca Demazu, its artist. According to several interviews, while Shirai wrote the storyline and provided basic storyboards, Demazu had almost total creative control over the visuals. This means that a lot of the imagery that struck me as so meaningful may have never been intended by the person who actually decides what happens next. This desire to not push any ideas onto the reader is fine and respectable even, but naturally limited what the story could be. Over its course, the manga shifts from describing which character's ideology it believes to be right, which at first seems to be Norman's, to showing which character it hopes is right, which is clearly Emma. The story twists itself over to provide Emma and her idealism as clear a path to success as possible. As I discussed, her decisions never lead to the sort of catastrophe that traumatized Yugo, and in general she hardly experiences any substantial setbacks. All of her victories are permanent. This lack of setback for Emma harms the development of the other characters as well. Rei was probably the most compelling character across the first arc, but never afterwards shows the sort of agency or unique perspective that made him interesting. Because his ideology loses out to Emma's so early on, the story doesn't know what to do with him. The Queen conceptually could have been a compelling final villain, but because she was introduced suddenly and so late in the game, well after the stakes no longer feel high, she felt more like a monster of the week. As soon as the Promised Neverland decided that Emma was destined to win, that it would end on hope and optimism, the complexity, stakes, difficulty, and mystery present in its first half became unsustainable. Keeping the stakes and difficulty so high without changing the conclusion would basically require forcing its characters through an overwhelming amount of strife and trauma. Furthermore, Emma's perspective demands revolutionary change. To prove her right with any satisfying degree of rigor and intricacy would require claiming to know how precisely the world should be revolutionized. All the manga was able to commit to was advocacy for the inherent value of human life and encouragement for optimism and perseverance. There are many other ideas thrown softly and cautiously around, but in terms of what the story actually lands on, that's it. Providing final answers to all the other questions it raised was always beyond its scope. But it did raise those questions. It is perfectly fine to dislike how the story changes, okay to be disappointed that its darkest moment happened in the very first chapter. I feel that way myself. Yet I have to be thankful that we got as much as we did. For not all but a lot of its run, The Promised Neverland was thought-provoking and challenging art. Its willingness to unflinchingly compare its uniquely creative horrors to real-world power structures forces the reader to reconsider their own worldview. There is a reason why this video became the longest thing I have ever written, a reason why it is easy to find examples online of people talking about how the series altered their perspectives on veganism and animal rights. Even though it knows it can never end them, it always strives to start difficult conversations. The Promised Neverland looks up halfway through its performance, turns the microphone to the audience, and says, "Now it's your turn." Hi, thank you so much for watching to the end of this huge video. I'm pretty sick right now, so I hope I don't look or sound too bad. I'm probably gonna deep fry the face cam or something. But anyway, yeah, this was my biggest creative project ever, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Of course, feel free to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of what I do. This was a super interesting topic to tackle, and I don't think that my work is even close to the final word on this story. There are so many different ways to interpret everything, angles to look at it from, characters I didn't even mention. I put some discussion questions in the pinned comment to expand the conversation, which is something I always do, but especially this time I am so interested to hear more from a wide range of people on what they thought about this series. I fully expect my understanding of The Promised Neverland to continue to grow, so I'm going to really value all the comments I get from different perspectives. Two particular things I couldn't cleanly fit into the script were the character of Aish, who is super cool in concept and design, but like rushed and underdeveloped in practice, and this moment where Emma tells Sonju that if she had to die, she wouldn't mind being eaten by him, which is like just the weirdest thing to say, and I feel like might undermine a lot of what I think the Promised Neverland says. So if you have any good ideas on what's going on there, let me know below. Last thing, I have a Patreon where I provide updates, early access to videos, and your name in the credits forever. And in the future, I want to build a Discord community and introduce legally binding polls for the topic of the next video. My goal right now is to hit $50 a month, after which I'll make a full analysis of Final Fantasy VII. So if you want to help make this channel into something that's financially sustainable for me and make more projects like this one possible, and have the financial means to do so, any support is incredible to me. I've been Skyhoppers, and I'll see you in the next one.